Hello there, this is Founder Laerun, and I am here with Fantasy Grounds College. I am going to show you how to optimize your desktop space so that you don't get as frustrated or as upset, or that you don't get crowded out too much. So I'm going to start off by saying that depending on the size of your monitor, you can scale your screen. So the smaller you go, in this case, the more desktop space you have, but the smaller the fonts and the windows become. So you kind of have to balance between visibility and room. And that all depends on your resolution of your screen and what type of play that you have to perform on your virtual tabletop. But this is a screenshot of the settings in Fantasy Grounds Unity. If you go to settings and you go to the basic tab, this is where your license key and all that stuff is. Well, there is an app, kind of a button or a slider that you can use. It's the Fantasy Grounds application UI scale. If you set your user interface here, it's permanent. If you do it within the game with the command, it's only for that session. So that's something to keep in mind. But I have mine at 80%. That's because I have a decent 22-inch screen. But if you have something smaller, you might want to go to like 90 or 95. So if you're using a laptop with a small screen, it'll give you a little bit more room, not much, but I wouldn't go any lower than 90 with a smaller 15, 17, or 19-inch screen. Anything larger than that, you could probably get away with a smaller number. And that has to do with how tiny things are and how much room you have on your desktop. So that's a start. Now, to deal with the actual fonts and such, there's not a lot we can do. There are character field limitations in the rule set itself. So when you're using Fantasy Grounds, we don't have a lot of choice as to what gets changed in fonts. However, there are some third-party extensions that will help with that. So I'm going to bring up my show notes, and we're going to go over your layout of your screen. I'm getting ready to go over to talk about this extension that Matakure made. So on the Fantasy Grounds forums, Matakure created a set of fonts that work within Unity and Classic, and there are two separate extensions, and there's like 3 or 4 different font options. Now you only use the fonts sparingly, or one at a time. You don't load up 3 or 4 because you can't toggle between them anyways. So you have to load those before you load your campaign. So you install the extensions or drop them into your extensions folder, refresh Fantasy Grounds, and then they'll show up in your menu to load. And at that case, you will select one of the fonts that you want to try. And then when you look at your chat window, you'll be able to tell that the text is a little bit bigger. Not a lot, but a little bit. It helps somewhat. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this screen here. And this is sort of a diagram, sort of some of the things I was talking about. And I'm going to click on Create Image Record. And now that I have this as a screen asset, I'm going to go ahead and expand it a little. So I do that by dragging on the bottom right corner, and I would do this with maps and such if I had any. And then I'm going to use this drop-down tool toggle bar and click Zoom to Fit, and then close this, and then kind of zoom in as needed. Now this is horizontally orientated. So what you want to do is on the bottom right corner, kind of orientate the window to the shape of the image that you're showing. And then I'll just click this, that'll recenter it. And this is how you would basically adjust for maps too. So now I can zoom in and out. So what I was talking about earlier for extensions is that would be something that you would load before you actually load into your campaign. So once you select whatever rule set you're using, then you would select the extension, and then you would hit start, and that would take you to your session that you want to play. And all it does is it scales the UI and the app for visibility's sake and for room. But if you go too too zoomed out, then you're going to have very small font. So to work around that, download one of Matacure's Unity extensions, provided you're using Unity. They also have some for Classic. So on here, I have a link. If I click on that, it goes straight to the Fantasy Grounds forums. I will put these links in the description later. But as you can see, he has two versions. He has a Classic version, and then he has Unity version. So make sure that you download the correct ones. And he's got 4 different options here for Unity. Make sure you download each one individually and that you only load one at a time, because you can't change them once you load up the program. In here, these are the same thing for Classic. It would be exactly the same. So this is a kind of a little pointer, a workaround. You know, it's not perfect. As a matter of fact, I'll show you something that I noticed when I use these. So when you use these particular extensions, you have character field limitations vertically. So in other words, if you try to use your own font and it was larger, it gets cut off at the bottom and the top. So I can show you an example of that. So I have bold text here. So on standard text, it's fine. But when I highlight the text and make it bold, it starts to cut off the bottom, like on this letter G. So I'm going to right click on this and bring up the, I'm going to bring up the pointer properties. And I have a magnifier, and I will show you exactly what I'm talking about. So right here, where it says large, there is the G. The letter G is starting to get cut off. Same thing with this word, this letter image, same thing. So when you're using a font that's, you know, larger than the capability of the field limitations for that particular text, it gets cut off. So if you're using big font or one of those other older ones, that's going to happen to you. So just be careful, keep that in mind. If you use a font extension, that it may potentially cut off some of your characters. And the more you dig around in the forums, the more you'll find these things, but they may not necessarily work with Unity, or they may not look good depending on what you're doing. So that is one minor thing that it becomes a major thing. A lot of people have a hard time seeing, or you know, they don't like the fonts. Well, not a lot we can do. I mean, unless they totally redid the whole program, that's not going to go away. So this has been a problem for a long time, and the community has found some workarounds. They're not perfect, but they do help a little. The other thing is, make sure you wear your glasses if you are someone who has a subscription, and you can do that without the glare bothering you. That helps. Also, your distance from your screen has a lot to do with your visibility. So make sure you're sitting at a decent distance from your monitor to where you're sitting. That makes a difference. Your posture, all those things contribute to your visibility of this particular program, especially since the text is pretty small. So the font only affects like these story entries and the chat. It doesn't change the things on the character sheets or in the menus necessarily. It just changes the chat window and the text that's displayed within the entries. Other than that, the UI itself isn't going to be changed by these. So like this campaign button up here, that's not going to change. The other thing you can do, if it's something that you constantly use, let's say maybe it's some notes that you want for your players, or maybe it's a guideline, or perhaps it's a bar menu in your game. If that's the case, then what you can do is, now that Fantasy Grounds Unity has updated, you can take and put a graphic to use as your decal. That's no longer a big deal anymore. And I'm going to show you that. So when you come into Fantasy Grounds, if you want to use a graphic that is going to be helpful for your table, or maybe you want a map or whatever it is, you don't have to make an extension, or you don't have to edit an extension anymore. In this particular campaign, if you have the image you want to use in your campaign folder, then by all means you can use it. So I'm going to refresh the folder because I've added a new asset in here. So I'm in the images, and then I went to folder, And I put in this graphic here. It's a cheat sheet for combat. So I'm going to put this in as an actual background decal instead of just the fancy artwork. So doing that, I hit refresh. And now the new graphics that I have added to my folder are apparent. And if you double click on this graphic image, it'll pull up a preview. You can create this as a campaign record, or you can set it as a decal. So in this case, I'm going to replace this decal in the background as a cheat sheet for my players. So now this is a permanent image, or semi-permanent. I can always change it with a different graphic if I want. But now this is visible for your players at all times. And this talks about combat in this case. So that tells you what your turn, what you can do, the order of the turn, and some notes here that talks about each section. And then down below, these actions, what the terminology is, and what type of interactions you can do as in between your turns. So this is kind of a cheat sheet that I found on the DM's Guild. You can make up your own, or you could type something up, but it's nice and handy to have this in the background so that you don't have to constantly explain the things, especially if you have newer players. So you can put a decal back here to kind of make up for the fact that this would not look so great necessarily in Fantasy Grounds as text. So if you need an infographic or something, that's kind of a workaround too. The other thing I can say that's not as good, but you know, even another thing you can do is if you have a story entry and you want to share some of the text in this window, you can actually unlock this and highlight this information. And you can drag and drop it into the text area, into the chat window, and hit enter, and it'll show up better than trying to do it in here. I think this is a much cleaner look to it than looking at this. So if you really have to, if there's portions of the adventure or things that you want people to read, that's another kind of workaround. It's not the best, but it's better than nothing. So these are just things to get over the fact that you might have trouble with text or reading the text. It doesn't fix the program, but it does provide you with options to get around the fact that the fonts are not very desirable for most people. So now the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to start talking about your table layout. And this is something that people struggle with. So I showed you how to add a background image from the asset. We discussed options for fonts and such. Now let's talk about the real estate on the actual screen. So in my show notes, I also mentioned this pointer that I have. Now the pointer doesn't work in Discord or in your OBS or whatever you're using unless you capture it as a screen and not application. So in other words, this won't show up if I stream this unless I have it set in OBS as a full screen image. So that's an important aspect of understanding these pointer things, because they don't hold up or they don't display multi-layers if you only select one layer. So when you select the full screen, unfortunately it shows everything, but when you do that, you'll be able to use these pointers if you need to. It's probably rare that you have to use this, but if you're doing a presentation or a class, or if you're doing some sort of seminar, which might be at a convention or something, you may want to adopt this sort of thing. So when you use OBS and Discord, you need to show and change the stream as a actual desktop, everything in a screen instead of an application. Because if it's application, then it's only going to show one layer of that application. So that's something you need to keep in mind with pointers. This one is called Pointer Focus. I'm not here to advertise which ones are better, which ones aren't, but this one's a $12 paid one. There are free ones out there. I went to the website and did a little investigation, and it is basically a really small, light application. It has other functions. I kind of like what it does, and there is a download and a buy button here. But if you want to get a pointer that has a lot of options, but it's smooth. This is the one I recommend, but there's others out there that do the same thing. And I'm sure some of them are free. But as again, free may not necessarily mean better. So I went ahead and paid for this, and it seems to work pretty good. Okay, so the next step is now we have this decal back here. It might be a little annoying. So if you don't want to see that and get distracted by it, I'm going to go to Assets again, and I'm going to go to Images and then my campaign folder. And then I might just put up something like this thing here, which is the Idea Informer. So if I double click on it and I click on Set Background Decal, it will replace the current one with this one. And this one actually goes into the Idea Informer, which is a website that you can visit that is sponsored by Fantasy Grounds. They put this up here so that we can vote and add different things that we want. So you want to make sure that your ideas don't already exist. So you search to see if someone's already asked for something similar. You get to vote for existing requests if they match your wants. You get to track feature requests. So if you subscribe to this or you keep an eye on it, you can see the comments and follow it. And you can request to add a feature or an idea. So instead of going into a forum and ranting and complaining or being upset about something that's missing or broken, it's a good idea to use this so that your voice is actually heard. If you go into a forum where Fantasy Grounds doesn't work at or they don't look at, you're not going to be heard. You're just going to be looked at as somebody that's complaining. So you get your ideas documented here. You'll receive feedback if it's going to be worked on and such. You'll be heard and considered because people will see your post, and it's more effective and efficient to do it this way than to just post all over the place in a rant or in some sort of frustration. You'll have more official visibility, so more people that work with Fantasy Grounds and the Fantasy Grounds staff will look at that. You'll get more support in that idea, less confusion and grief. And you're communicating with the community. You're not just yelling and complaining. So this is a really good idea to fill this out. Even if your idea never makes it to the changes that you want, at least you've made it heard and it's listed and documented. And later on down the road, if the capability isn't available now, it might be later. So keep that in mind when you are complaining, requesting, or checking on features that you want. So that kind of goes hand in hand with the font thing. So a lot of people complain about the fonts. That's probably one of the biggest complaints. I don't see that getting fixed anytime soon. So make sure that you have a valid request and that it's not something that is informal or very obnoxious or filled with anger. It's not gonna fix your problem. Okay, so now let's talk about layout. So I do have a certain layout that I use when I employ Fantasy Grounds as my go-to desktop. Another thing you can do with decals is right now it's set to custom. If I want to turn it off, I can go back to SmiteWorks, or I can just go off altogether. So that's how you would turn it off if you've assigned something. And then if you go back to, if you go back to custom, it's going to put up the last one that you selected and that you put up there. So that's a good thing. All right, so the next thing is, how do you lay this table out? This godforsaken room here that you may or may not have. So they've already reduced the overhead of all the buttons and banners. A lot of people were not happy about that. I myself don't mind it. It is a little smaller, but it gives a lot of room for desktop space, and it creates standardizations. If you guys want to watch my other video about the changes that were made, a lot of people made comments in Reddit and YouTube that they didn't like it. Well, that's fine. You don't have to like it, but it is a step in the right direction. It cuts down on memory usage, and the entire rule set is a little bit snappier, so it doesn't take as long to load things. So if that's the trade-off that they're going for, I'm all for that. I don't need fancy buttons. That's more of a creature feature. or what I call a left-handed mushroom softener. It's really not necessary. It just kind of keeps the monotony down. I understand that people like that fancy customized look, but you know, if it's going to improve the performance and the efficiency when people develop content for Fantasy Grounds Unity, I'm good for it. Now, if they just did it just to change things, then I wouldn't like that. But I really think there was some thought behind that. Okay, so the next thing is, how do you lay this stuff out? So generally, when you first set up, this is kind of what it looks like minus my notes here. The first thing I do is I right-click on this frame here, and let me turn back on my pointer. Because you're going to lose out on some of my instruction, or you might not see it. Oops, I did it again. And no, there's no pun intended there. No Britney Spears, please. Okay, so I'm going to minimize this, not close it. All right, so I right-click on it. If you see the eraser, you can clear the text. If you right-click on it again, or you can see this unlock position. So that allows you to drag this corner and size any way you want. Well, for Fantasy Grounds, in most cases, you don't need a huge, tall vertical space. So I just set it to about this width, and I'm going to put the dice tower right underneath here once I'm done. So I'm not going to lock it yet, but I'm going to go ahead and position it like this. And then I'm going to go to Options. And if you want to see the dice tower, like your players, there's some settings. So you have two settings that are dependent. If you turn on the dice tower, it only shows to your players. And when you roll the dice, it's hidden by default. But if you want to see the dice tower too, like your players, you will turn on Chat Show GM Rolls. Turn that on, and the dice tower will appear. It might look a little different depending on the rule set, but nonetheless, you can right-click on it, and that unlocks its movement. You can't resize it, unfortunately, but you can unlock and move it. And then I'm going to reposition the chat window right above it, and the right-hand side, I have it lined up so it's nice and clean and even. And I even scooch that over a little bit so that it's less room that I'm using on the desktop. And once I've done that, then I'll lock the background here, and I will lock the dice tower. So the chat window's locked and the dice tower. So this kind of minimizes your footprint of what you're using. Now the next thing is the combat tracker. This is a very important aspect of Fantasy Grounds. So generally, as a player or a game master, I will leave a little gap up here because when people join, that's where their tokens show up or their status. And then I will take the combat tracker and stretch it to about there, and that gives me room for my players and my what do you call it? My combatants, NPCs. So this is Sterling here. He's a 4th level rogue. So I'm going to go ahead and drag him on and put him on the dice or on the combat tracker. And I have one other player I want to put there. Balasar. I think he's a warrior or a fighter. Let me see here. Yeah, he's a fighter. So we have a rogue and a fighter. Now that they're on the combat tracker, now what I'm going to do is optimize the location of all my windows here. So I'm going to touch this up a little bit so it matches with the combat tracker. You're going to be limited. You can't make it any smaller than it's going to go. So right now, this is as the least width I can get away with. The reason for that is if you go any further, you lose all these buttons. You can't see them. So they have a limit as to how far to the left you can bring these. So now I'm going to make sure I got these locked. Let's see. Okay, you can't lock the combat tracker. But if you need to move it, instead of moving it around, which is a big mistake that most of us make in the beginning, just close it. So if you need the space back here for some reason, just close the combat tracker, and then you go right back up to the top right corner. You can open it back up. You can dismiss it, open it up, dismiss it. So this is something you want to get used to doing instead of moving the windows. Once you have a window placed, leave it there. So if you like it in this spot, leave it in this spot. Because if you drag this over because you need this space behind here and you close it, guess where it's going to go back to? Right there where you don't want it. It'll probably be over a map or something like that. So you want to leave your windows where they are. That is an important thing to remember. The next step is the characters themselves. If for some reason you have new players and you need to keep an eye on what they're doing, you can actually take the characters and stretch them out from top to bottom so you can see everything. And I'm just gonna take them and just put them in a stacked position. And then I'm going to go to the Actions tab, where most of the stuff happens anyways, and make sure it says Combat and Actions on the bottom. And each character I will do this with. And this way, when I'm playing, I don't have to come back here and open up their character sheets and resize them. They're ready to go. So if I close them by accident, all I have to do is click in the combat tracker on this button. That brings up their sheet. Or if they're on the map somewhere, you can double click on their token and it will bring up the sheet. So if one of your players accidentally closes their character sheet, all they have to do is double click on here. And if they accidentally close the map, if they double click on their character sheet on the right hand side where their token is, it will bring up the map that they are on. So those are just little things that you should know as a player or a game master as time goes on. So you're not going to know that right off the bat, but I'm letting you know that that is a way to get around that problem. The other thing is you can take these pins or these shortcuts and you can actually shortcut your characters or any map that you might be currently on. So if you accidentally close the character sheets, down here in the bottom where I put them as a shortcut, there they are. The next thing is the show notes that I have. So the notes for the show that I'm doing right now is right here. And I'm not even gonna, I don't need to see the whole thing. So I'm just gonna put it down here as one of my windows that I want to manage. And now from now on, when I want to go through the stories or anything, if I had more, I'd use the arrows on the bottom, and then I would just click on the window and scroll up and down to get to the content I need. That way, when I close this, it's always going to go back where I had it. So, and if I don't want it there, I can dismiss it. I can just close it. And when I need it again, it's in the shortcuts. So get used to using the shortcuts and laying out your table ahead of time. So I'm doing all this before we actually start playing. So this is just a kind of a tried and true method. You don't have to do it exactly this way, especially if your rule set's a little different. You might have windows in a different place. But all in all, the message is that once you have something in location, leave it there. If I want to see this other character sheet, I'm not going to move the sheet. I'm going to come over to the combat tracker and I'm going to click on, let's say it's Sterling's turn and he has a question about his character, what he can do. I can click on this little link and it brings up the character sheet. Now, when I go to Balthasar, same thing. If I click on the little link on the right, it'll bring up the character sheet. So I don't have to move them around, and normally I don't have a side-by-side comparison. If I do, that's fine. I'll have to go like this for a second, and then when I'm done, I will put it back where I wanted it. So this is something that people struggle with. Please think about this when you're using Fantasy Grounds. This will help you a lot. It will cut down the amount of windows, and if you have a ton of windows, you're going to have them where you want them to appear. Now, if you're running off the seat of your pants or you're doing this on the fly, this may not be a good solution for you. But if you take a little time to plan out your adventure, meaning the layout of your screen, not necessarily what's going to happen in the game, this will help immensely. So make sure that you take the time to lay this out. It really does help. I'm a bit late, but I love the savage sassiness. Yeah, people will always find something to complain about. The changes all seem sensible. Yeah, I understand the complaint, and it's something that people get really passionate about. But honestly, it's a game, right? And at the end of the day, I think that they really took the time to think about this and to make the changes for a more positive reason. There's probably more pros than cons. So when they weighed this out, they said, yeah, 30% of our users won't like it, but the other 70% will. And I think that's the important part of Fantasy Grounds and having a team of people to work on it. And then, of course, community input. So the other thing now that I want to show is a map. This is where players and game masters, especially if you're new, have issues. So I'm going to bring up a map, and I already have it kind of figured out. So here's a map. This is by Chris of Game Tile Warehouse. This is a college for wizards. This is the herbology class, and this is the battle map that goes for it. And all I do is I'll size this frame. I don't care what the image is. I'm sizing the frame that will fit in this area. So that's the main thing. I have set aside this area for my maps. And if I need a little bit more room, I can definitely change the way I lay this out. And once you have the frame laid out, then you can right click and you can go to layers or to view in this case. And then I can go zoom to fit and it will recenter the map, or I can use this drop down toolbar and there is a zoom to fit button. And that will fit the area that you have assigned, and it will rescale it. Now, if you want it a little bit bigger for some reason, you click anywhere on the map, not on a token, but anywhere else, and roll your mouse wheel forward or roll it back. That's all you need to do if the map is proportioned correctly. So what I'm saying is, if you don't have a gargantuan map and you have a reasonable sized map that is for this situation, this is like a situational map, not a regional map. Regional maps are different. We're talking about a battle map or a scene that you're going to set up for some sort of action. So this map is probably 1390 by something. I don't remember the exact dimensions, but it is orientated horizontally, which helps. And it is not huge, and it's not a super high resolution. So you don't need to hold back as much in Unity as far as file size if you are making stuff for yourself and you're not really playing online. And if you're just playing around a table at home, you're probably okay. But if you are playing online with other players, if this map is too big or too high in resolution, you have to push that to them online. And if they have bad internet, it could either crash their computer or not arrive at all. So then you'll have to have them disconnect, reconnect, and then try to see if the cache on their computer is actually pulling the file in. And that's something that we all are guilty of at one point or another. You don't want Herkin maps. And there's other problems too, but that is probably the number one problem. The other thing is, if you have a map that's really big, you have to zoom in quite a bit, kind of like what I'm doing here. And then you're going to have to drag this around, resize it. And if you hold down the middle mouse button and you click somewhere on the map, you can essentially avoid, using the expansion. However, you got to do this on everybody's turn. So that is annoying. So if you have a huge map, think about busting it up into pieces if you can. If not, then be prepared to scroll around all over the place all day long. And that is very annoying and time consuming. So if that is something you're doing, consider getting smaller maps made or figuring out a different solution, maybe using some of the tiles if you understand how to use them, and use those as a way to map out a map. So if you're using Dungeon of the Mad Mage, it's horrible for that. You have to sit here and scroll way out, figure out where you're at, zoom in, and then keep doing that, and it just drives you nuts. So I'm going to zoom to fit, and this is what an optimal size map is. So this is pretty close to what you want. And, you don't want any more than, I think, 1,500 by 1,000 is probably about the max in dimensions of length and width, or height and length, or height and width, excuse me. So your smaller side is going to be your height, and your longer side is going to be your width. It's usually better to have, or a square one's good too. But if you have a map that's vertically oriented, then that becomes an issue, because now this window has to be like this, and it takes up a lot of room. So if you can reorient your map, which is doable in Unity, not in Classic, so you can click on the layer of the map. If it's locked, unlock it. And then you can go to the layers button here, and you can rotate it. So now if you need the map and it's normally oriented like this, you can have it reoriented the way you want, as long as it makes sense for you. And then you just relock it, and then get out of the map tools, re-expand it, and resize your window accordingly, and then zoom to fit, and there we go. So these are things that people kind of struggle with. Another thing I was telling you about is when you're done with, sizing everything, I'm going to put my players on the map. And I'm going to zoom in a little so I can see what's going on. And when a player has his token on there, and you can single click on the token, hold down the right control key or control key, and expand their token a little bit so that you can see the image a little bit better. You don't, maybe one or two rolls of the mouse forward or backwards will rezoom it. And then the other thing is, when your players have the map, you manipulate the frame with this bottom right corner. Try not to move the whole thing. I mean, initially you have to. But once the map is sized and your game master's pushed it to you, get it to where you can see everything. And I mentioned before that if you automatically or accidentally close your character sheet, if you double click on the token on the map, it'll bring your sheet back up. It's that simple. Or if you close the map, you can double click on your token, not the portrait, but the actual token. It will bring up the last map that you were on. So that is a pro tip for players and game masters. So hopefully that helps. All right, so the next thing is I'm going to talk about a little bit about encounters. So I have some set up here, and I'm going to demonstrate something that slows the game down quite a bit. But before I do that, I'm going to bring up one other image. This is a map that is provided by Wizards of the Coast. It's an official map. It's an official map that is created for the D&D 5e rule set and its official content. One thing I noticed, that this map is not optimized for Fantasy Grounds, so you're going to be scrolling around a lot. And when you try to line up the actual map here with the existing tiles, they don't line up, because this map would need to be stretched using a tool called Map Aligned. So if you go in here and you try to edit this map and line up these squares, it's basically not going to line up correctly. And there's a couple reasons for that. The map was not created for a virtual tabletop, and whoever converted this didn't take the time to try to re-stretch it, or maybe they couldn't. Maybe it was just too warped or too out of characteristic. So that means that these squares are actually rectangles. So when I go into the tool itself and I unlock it, this map is really messed up. So if I go to the grid, and I have the size of the grid pretty close. So if I see, I'm going to adjust this, and I got it lined up pretty good. I mean, this is close. But when you zoom out, you can see that this square is lined up, but the other ones, as you get further away from where you worked, they don't line up. And that's because the map is not stretched or optimized for virtual tabletop. It is not actually square. It has some kind of distortion to it. So if you run into that, you're going to have to use a tool called Map Align, and that's a third-party tool outside of Fantasy Grounds. There is a couple videos out there that the community has put out. They're not official videos because Map Align is not an official tool, but it does help fix this problem. You just have to learn to use the application. But it's better if you find maps that do not have a grid on it already, so this isn't as bad of a situation. So that's just something that's a little bit outside of the scope of the adventure or the show, but at least you get an idea of what you're dealing with. So this map is set up pretty good. So if I come in here and I look at these tiles, I can line these up fairly well. So there are tiles in this room here. So if I move these over, and if you know the scale of the map, that's important. If it's 60 or 50 pixels per square, that's very important. So I'm going to come in here and use this tile as an example. So I'm going to go in and unlock this, and I'm going to move this up or down or left or right, depending. So I'm going to go to the grid, and I'm going to move this over a little bit so it matches up. See, that's a little bit off, so maybe I'll go to 52 maybe. And then I might go over to the right a little bit. And once I've done that, there we go. And as you can see, I have to adjust a little bit more. So ideally, when this map was first made, it had a scale. But the minute you start playing around with the image, like if you try to make it smaller, for instance, or you try to adjust it in a graphics program, if you're not sure what you're doing, you're basically going to sort of break the scale. Because as you see, I'm kind of having a hard time lining these up. And this particular map was rescaled for some reason, but it's close enough. I mean, this is going to be decent. Anyways, this isn't a map making class, but I just wanted you to see the kinds of problems you're gonna face. So that is something that you have to deal with as a game master. I think that it's ideal that you get maps that don't have grids if you can help it, and put them on yourself. It makes it so much easier. And that'll slow down your prep time, so it's a good thing to mention that. The other thing is the combat tracker. When you have encounters, you will often see this. So here's an encounter with 10 goblins and 2 hobgoblins. So the hobgoblins are sort of like their lieutenants or like their tough guys. So I'm going to bring the map back up. I'm going to use this whacked out one here. Now what we're going to see here is I'm going to link this encounter to the map. So then I'm going to bring the players over, which I'm going to click on this green helmet, and might be a dragon or something on the bottom frame of the combat tracker. And I can drop them at the same time without having to individually drag them over. But once they get close to this section, then I'm going to click on the encounter. And when you add this, you click the down arrow. And here are all the combatants. So here's the party members and all the creatures. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to go ahead and drag all the creatures at once too. Unfortunately, you got like 50,000 tokens, and this is hard to manage on the fly. So if you don't have this encounter planned out and already placed, it's going to be much more difficult. So what you want to do is break these up into smaller encounters. And another thing is you're going to be scrolling up and down, up and down. So rather than having this huge encounter, break it up into waves. So I'm going to go to menu, I'm going to go to delete, and I'm only going to delete the foes because I want to leave my players on there. Okay? So rather than that big, huge encounter, I'm going to split it up into 2 encounters. So I'm going to delete the shortcut because I don't want to use that encounter anymore. I'm going to do it in waves. Wave 1 is 6 goblins and 1 hobgoblin. So I'm going to go ahead and place these ahead of time so I know where they're going to come from. You don't always have this luxury, but... So I'm going to place them strategically. I'm placing the individual tokens where I want them to appear. And this is well before the game, not during. So here's that. Here's that. And here's that. And then their boss. Okay, that's the first wave. I'll link that here, just so it's here. And now, when I send this over, when I close this, actually, they'll disappear off the map, which is fine. Wave 2 won't come for a few more rounds. So they'll be further up in the cave somewhere, or maybe just standing back to see what happens, to preserve their ranks, whatever reasoning you want to put behind it. But I'm going to go ahead and place these guys too further back. So they don't show up for about anywhere from 2 to 4 rounds. You can roll for it, or you can decide just to do it when you feel like doing it. So I'm going to go ahead and add these guys as kind of like reinforcements, and to kind of wait to see how the encounter goes. And now I'm going to go ahead and link this encounter to the desktop. Okay, so that's my second wave. So the first wave, like I said, is 6 goblins and a hobgoblin. So when I click down, they come up on the screen, and it's much easier to manage this many than the whole encounter. Because once you add the second wave, then you've got a ton of combatants. So I would wait for a few people to die or to go away or run off or whatever, or be frozen or whatever the issue is, and bring in the second wave later, maybe 2 to 4 rounds later, before you load up your combat tracker, because now it slows the game down, it gets sluggish, and when you have too many tokens on the battle map, that also creates memory issues and such. So use that sparingly on these encounters. You don't want a huge encounter if you can help it. Sometimes you don't have a choice, but if you do it in waves, it's so much easier to manage. So again, encounters can be too large. Maps can be too large. So do it in bite sizes as opposed to one big, huge encounter. So this map here, honestly, if I had the skill or a choice, I would cut it up into 4 pieces, and then I would link them together, and then I'd put all my encounters in here as needed. That way, I'm only managing this area here and not this huge map. You can use a Game Master's map like this, and then pin all the combat maps, the quadrants or the fourths of the map, in these sections so that when you get to that point, you click on it, it brings up this section of the map instead of the entire thing. And this is where a lot of people struggle with the game. Now, sometimes it's not feasible. I get it. And it's like too much time, or I don't have the tools or the knowledge. But if you do and you are able to, or you can make your own maps, I recommend doing that over using this gargantuan map here. This is a pretty good sized map. Honestly, it should be cut into 4 pieces. That's the way I would do it, just to make it easier. Or I might just cover or hide the 3/4 I don't want used. So there's another option. However, you're adding another mask layer and you're adding more memory. So there's a trade-off as to what you're doing with this. So these are some tips to make your game go faster, to manage your desktop, and to get around some of the frustrating aspects of Fantasy Grounds. A reason I did this show is because I've seen too many comments out there and too many mistaken identities of what Fantasy Grounds can or can't do. I really think that this is a starting point to help you minimize that amount of grief and to keep with Fantasy Grounds and be patient with it and let them work on it and actually make it better for us. And that's something that we all have to do, including me. I get really frustrated. The whole reason I created the college was out of frustration. I want you guys to have a smooth, fun game with easy transition and not all this frustration and moving things around. I mean, that's when things get really messy. So try to be organized. Take a little show notes thing like I did and create a list of things that you're going to be using in your encounter, and then make links. Like I can drag this link to the map. Everything I'm going to use for this session, or most everything, is in here. And this would be my session 1. And then my next session, I would make another one of these, but it would have different things in it. And maybe a link back to this in case I wanted to look at the notes. That way you're not constantly bringing up windows, trying to remember where they were and all that stuff. You want the things to be in location before you start. And that's a big, big, big tip. And I learned this from the Digital Dungeon Master. I don't know if he still does this or not, but he's the one that got me thinking about windows placement and how many different things you want. And I've seen other tips from other people as well. So this is where I learned it from, just like watching videos and hanging out and using the software and getting to know what it can do and what it can't do. So please keep this in mind. This will help you. It's not the solve all, fix all, know it all. It's just what I've learned over time and from community input and from doing my own research. So hopefully this helps. This kind of brings and ties things together for you. Hopefully this will be something that you will practice at your table if it's applicable. I understand that some rule sets don't have all this, or they may have more. But you need to find and compartmentalize what you're doing to make it simpler for you. These windows can be a real bear when you're trying to manage them in the middle of a game. So get it laid out the way you want it and play. Once you're done, then you can fiddle around with it and move stuff around. So that is all I have for you today. If there are any questions, I'll be willing to answer those. I can't see the chat very well. And My Squeezing Arm has said that another bonus for no grid maps is that you can use hexes and other shapes if you want, which is a really good thing because you may not use squares or maybe nothing at all. Who knows? But you should have a grid on the map in case, because those tokens won't scale properly. The only time that may be an exception if you have a large regional map and you might just have one token showing where your party is. That might be a thing. If I ran Dungeon of the Mad Mage, I would have the main map or the DM's map as like my overview, and then I would make or provide smaller areas to use for the encounters. I don't think I would use the huge player map. That's just way too much crap. I don't mind doing the extra work because I'm not going to end up having to scroll and move the map around and do all this. That's way too much work. So try to minimize the amount of movement and the amount of clicking and opening windows that you have to do. This is pretty much a very, very straightforward, orthodox way of doing it. You might have a slightly different way. Maybe you have it reversed. I don't know. But this is what I know as far as, running the games and setting things up, is to have it like this. And if this doesn't work for you, then go ahead and move on to your other VTTs. But I guarantee you that you're not going to be able to use it unless you have offline usability. So even if you have another type of account, Fantasy Grounds allows me to work on this content, and I have access to everything regardless if I have internet. So keep that in mind when you're making your choices. Is if you don't have offline access to your content, then that may not be a thing for you. So I like to be able to be with my content. So if I'm stuck in a doctor's office for an hour, I'm going to bring my laptop and I'm going to work on my campaign and not worry about being online. Or if I'm up camping and I want to run a game and I don't have Wi-Fi, I bring a couple batteries with me. We play around a table. I print out their character sheets ahead of time, and we can run that way too. So that's just something to keep in mind about the capabilities of virtual tabletops themselves. So anyways, take care. Hopefully these tips help. And I'd like to see you join the college if you haven't already. It's Fantasy Grounds College, Discord, and then sign up on our website. And every month coming up, we have Rule Set a Month, where we take a specific rule set and we focus on it, and we try to get it some exposure and try to help some of the people that are always subjected to 5e. They may like Pathfinder or Starfinder or some other rule set. So we are doing that every month. We're changing the rule set up. And at the end of July, we're going to have our Founders Day Festival. And there are a lot of good changes getting ready to come out here for Fantasy Grounds. I don't know what they are. I don't have any privileged information, but I know that the new line of sight for tokens, the actual dynamic lighting is due out anytime. So not a question about layout, but I do not know what the chain links in the combat tracker do. Only the player characters have them. The chain links. I'm not sure what you're saying. Chain links in the combat tracker. Not sure. It depends on your rule set too. Like these little things can be different. So not sure what that means. Does anybody know that? Anybody know what? Oh, I don't think so. I think Smiteworks keeps that pretty close to their chest. They don't divulge information unless it's done because of problems that may come up. They don't want to say, oh yeah, we're going to have it come out next week, and then it doesn't. So they're not like that. They're pretty much, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it type thing. I was surprised they announced this recent update. I was really shocked. And obviously they had to go back and fix a few things. So that's not normally in their nature to do that. So I don't know who knows, and I don't know anything about it. I imagine it'll be probably by the end of the month or so. I don't know. That's just a guess. Hopefully in time for some of the conventions coming up. Be really nice to showcase that. So I'm not sure what you meant by know the chain links in the combat tracker. I'm not sure. Not all rule sets will have that chain link. I think that's if there was a way that you could do a screenshot, but you can't. It depends on your rule set and your theme. So perhaps the theme has the chains and the other ones don't. I think it's to preserve your PCs and not wipe them. Could be mistaken. I don't know. Hopefully I'll figure it out someday. Maybe I'll go, oh, that's what that guy was talking about. Anyways, folks, anything else before I go? Hopefully this is helpful. These will be up on the social media channels. I'll go in and edit the descriptions. Like I said, this pointer is called Pointer Focus. You can now add graphics from within Fantasy Grounds as your background decal, and not have to create an extension or edit an existing one. And that you need to learn, or at least accept the fact that you have to lay out the screen and use it the way it's designed, and not complain about the fonts because of the character field limitations, and not complain about the fact that the UI has changed the buttons so they're so tiny that you can't see them. I mean, there's not much we can do about that, but it does offer optimization for us as we're playing. So now when I go to library and I pull up modules, I mean, it takes it like, I mean, that's a huge improvement. It used to take it like 30 seconds. Now it's like 5 seconds. So if that's what they did to fix that issue, and they added the paging to the module load, that is a huge thing for me. Waiting for this to load was like forever, and I have a ton of content, so that's part of the problem. The other thing is, for tokens and getting into accessing your library and such is so much smoother. And they used to have the view up here in the library, but now they moved it over to the options, which makes sense. That's an option to display what you're going to display. So it's down here under sidebar, and you can clear them. You can add all of them. You can do just the Game Master ones, or just the Play ones, or the Create PC ones. So it's pretty cool. And you can also add individually as you want them. So that's not bad. It's pretty decent. And then also you have Message of the Day now built in. So if you want this message to pop up when your players join your table, you have that option too. This used to be a third-party extension. Now it is included in the actual program. So this is what you get when you use the Idea Informer. Instead of a bunch of grief and people fighting and yelling at each other over a game. Doesn't make any sense. So anyways, I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good day. Happy gaming, and I'll see you next time.